Good morning and welcome to Forums That Matter. I'm Susan Alcorn and I'm the coordinator for today's forum and today's discussion, which is both in person and virtually. The title of today's forum is Gun, Violence, and Public Safety, What's Happening Locally. The topic plays a major role in local, state, and national politics. Over 60% of Republicans and Democrats are frustrated by the lack of gun laws. Black Americans are 10 times more likely to be killed by gun violence than their white counterparts. Most states do not have measurable, effective violence prevention programs that meaningfully reduce crime. And nationally, the NRA, the National Rifle Association, is one of the three most powerful lobbies in Washington. These are some of the reasons why we chose this topic this morning. I would now like to introduce our speakers. Rachel Lavelle, Assistant Professor and Director of the Cleveland State University Criminology Research Center, and Jared Schlott, the Commander of Cleveland's 1st Police District, serving neighborhoods on Cleveland's west side. Dr. Lavelle is an established CSU scholar whose work has obtained millions of dollars for applied research and the evaluation of violent crime. This includes gun violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and intimate partner violence. She works directly with people in the criminal justice system and many social service, neighborhood, and community organizations. Her work has been widely published in peer-reviewed publications and books. We are privileged to hear about her research, experience, and ideas for improving public safety. Jared Schlott has recently been promoted to the rank of commander by Mayor Bibb. As the commander of Cleveland's 1st Police District, he oversees Hams, West Park, Bel Air, Purist, Edgewater, Hopkins, and other West Side areas. As a former detective, he's investigated many violent felony crimes. He has also supervised officers on patrol in many Cleveland neighborhoods. Commander Schlott is a graduate of the FBI's National Academy of Police Executive Leadership. In terms of our discussion today, our speakers will have presentations from now until 9:30, and we'll have audience Q&A from 9:30 to about 9:55. Please turn off your phones or put them in airplane mode. We want to have enough time for discussion. Thank you.
So thanks for having us today. The commander and I kind of put together a co-presentation to give a little bit of background on the on gun violence, specifically as it relates to Cleveland and Cuyahoga County, just to sort of set the stage a little bit for what we were going to talk about. So we'll just be talking a little bit, just to give you a little bit of background on the issues. We'll be kind of going back and forth as it relates to this. So here's just the basics that we'll be talking about today for our brief session when we do our introductory conversation this morning. As Susan already mentioned, this is a little bit about us. Since she already gave the introductions, we don't necessarily need to talk about our backgrounds, but he's a commander in the 1st. And I'm a professor at Cleveland State. I've been there for 3 years, but I was at Case for 9 years before that. So I've been in the Cleveland area for about 11 years now.
I've been with Cleveland Police. This will be my 17th year, starting on the east side and going slowly, casually moving west as my career went on. And I was appointed by the mayor to be the commander of the 1st District in December of 2022. So a little over a year now, I've been in charge of the far west side of Cleveland. So, and then within the last 6 months, 5 months. The doctor and I have been working together. I've inherited a project called Shot Spotter, where it's ballistic technology that can track gunfire instantaneously, essentially, giving officers critical minutes to respond to provide first aid or catch criminals. Doctor has been in charge of the evaluation process. So we've been working very closely together for several months now.
Mhm. So that's how we met each other, is through that evaluation through Cleveland State. My colleague Stephanie Kent and I are leading the evaluation that's being funded from the city of Cleveland to evaluate the effectiveness of ShotSpotter, which is a gun detection technology that is being used nationwide and in Cleveland, hence the evaluation. Just to give an idea of scope around gun violence, I think it's, so these are some of the statistics that I pulled from the Cleveland Department of Health. I think it's important to first be able to differentiate what we actually mean by gun violence, because not all types of gun violence are the same. So the first arrow is really pointing at suicide by firearm, which is a public health issue, but that is different than gun violence by homicide, right? Those are two different types of public health issues and involve two different types of responses. Today, we'll be primarily talking about the aspect of homicides and gun violence, or the use of gun violence in crime, as I'm a criminologist and a victimologist. And he's in the police department, obviously, so working more on the crime side, but that isn't to minimize, which is actually much more common use of firearms, which is through accidental harm through firearms or through suicide involving a firearm. So here's just, this is from 2021, which was the most recent data available, at least online, from the Cleveland Department of Health on gun violence. And I think, especially as it relates to Cleveland, and as Susan mentioned in her introduction, in the abstract for this, that African Americans are significantly more likely to be victims of gunshots and homicides through firearms. Specifically in Cleveland, it's almost a 7-to-1 ratio. Cleveland is a majority minority city, so it's not surprising to see that disproportionality. But here, it's about 7-to-1. Nationally, it's between 10 and 14 times higher for African Americans to be victims of gun violence, especially as it relates to African American men. Part of what we were also set to talk about is what is being done to address gun violence. Specifically, we'll be talking about in Cleveland, since Cleveland has the vast majority of gun violent crime, but Shaker being an inner city suburb, and most of the inner city suburbs are the ones that experience the sort of the spillover, sort of the other effects of gun violence as it relates to Cleveland as well, being those inner city suburbs. So talking about what's being done in Cuyahoga County and in Cleveland specifically to reduce gun violence, and then in the presentation, which I've provided, are links to finding out more information on all the different types of programs that are being done as it relates to that. The DOJ recently adopted these 10 essential actions, like very recently, adopted as of December, a violent crime roadmap, and it has these 10 essential actions as a framework from the Council for Criminal Justice, that's the CCJ. It's a working group. These 10 essential actions for reducing gun violence, which will be a major framework within the DOJ, and the DOJ will be, the Department of Justice will be using to address how to address this gun violence. And it's a very nice framework to be able to understand the different ways that gun violence needs to be addressed. Here are the 10 essential actions that communities need to do. These are short-term ways to address. They're very clear that long-term ways to address are different. And so there really are calls to be able to how to address this by identifying that. Sure.
Is there any way you could read through those? Because
Yeah.
I'll bet some people can't see them.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. So the first one is set a clear goal, commit to saving lives by stopping violence. So the first one is really having very, strategic goals, primarily within the mayor's or whatever entity, the mayor or the sort of organizing entities structure for committing to saving lives by stopping violence. The second one is to identify the key people and places driving violence. That's a key tenet of criminology and victimology, that a very small amount of people and a small group of that small areas and small groups of people are the ones that are key drivers of violence. And so to prevent violence, you have to really do a narrow in on being able to identify the key areas that are the where the most violence is occurring, and where the key people committing those violence, and how they're connected, because the people are connected to the places and to each other through social networks. And so really being able to pinpoint those. The third one is to create a citywide plan for engaging people and places. The fourth is to engage key people with empathy and accountability. The fifth is to address key locations using place-based policing and investments. And Commander can talk some of the work being done certainly around place-based policing. Six would be place responsibility for violence reduction at the top. So this is really about making sure that there's accountability at the top for, here it would be the mayor's office or some aspect of that. 7 would be emphasizing healing and trauma-informed approaches. This would be providing social services to those who have been victims, have witnessed, and those that are committing acts of violence. 8 would be investing in anti-violence workforce development. 9 is set aside funding for new stakeholders and strategies, so forward thinking. And 10 is in my wheelhouse as well, which is to commit to continuous improvement based on data, evidence, and peer-to-peer learning. So continue to keep data and continue to learn and improve. So within that framework, talk one of what is being done locally, some of the evaluations that I'm leading up, and I'll just talk what I'm doing because I know that very well, but there's lots of stuff being done locally around here. Commander, you want to talk about some of the things?
So statistically in 2024, and these are year to date. So at this time last year in 23 compared to now, our homicides in the city of Cleveland are down 62.5%. Aggravated robberies, which is serious physical harm is caused or a weapon is used or brandished, are down 17.2%. And felonious assault shootings, so essentially people getting shot and living, are down 23.9%. This current administration in the city of Cleveland has really put an emphasis on violent crime reduction. Mayor Bibb, to the safety director, to the chief, has really been very strong in pushing this message towards the officers on the road. We've done it through a multitude of different strategies. The mayor adopted a RISE program, which he's taken funding and put it towards more police officers, technology for police officers, but also he's investing in the community. He's invested in working closely called LAND, which is a organization that ensures individuals can get funding for down payments to become homeowners. Because when you own that home in that neighborhood, you have a certain sense of pride where you're more of a stakeholder in the safety of that community. And it doesn't just give money to people for a down payment for a house. It teaches them strategies for financial security, for long-term growth in that home, which provides the equity to build onto the house or achieve more, a larger home or larger stake in that community. From a police standpoint, what I do as the commander of the district, we use these technologies provided to us. And one of them is the shot spotter that me and the doctor work closely on monitoring to see. And the way that works is there's essentially microphones strategically placed in areas of the city. And it triangulates the data of if it identifies the gunshot, it says, hey, before people will even call the police, we'll get notified by shot spotter that this was shot, this is the location it was shot. And it's pretty accurate to the location of, it can tell us the front yard, the backyard, behind a tree. It tells if there's multiple shooters. It can tell us if it's a high capacity firearm, such as an automatic like AR-15. It can tell us if it's a drive-by. So we know what we're going into, and we could send resources there accordingly. Also, things we've switched our being in the area just patrolling to what's called focus patrol. And the data, we're really data driven now. And we're hiring on analysts to come and tell us, you know, this is the trends we're seeing. These are the crimes we're seeing. And with focus patrol, we'll take a map, and they have the hotspot mapping, which is the yellow is where it's the most crime, and then it kind of fades out to a red, to an orange, and the crime dissipates as it gets further from that central location. And we break those areas up into grids. And then within those grids, studies have shown if you go into a grid 20 minutes every 2 hours, and you just do an infusion of resources in that, and then get out, go to another grid, infuse resources there. And I'm not saying just have officers go there and write tickets and throw people on cars and pat them down. That's an old way of thinking. This is an infusion of resources beyond just traditional law enforcement. Our officers may go there and get out of the cars and play basketball with kids. They may do what's called vertical patrol, where if it's a high-rise apartment building, we walk the floors and talk to everybody. What can we do for you today? Oh, your heat's not working? You know what? We can get with the landlord. We can make sure your heat gets turned back on. Getting to know the community. The city of Cleveland's always hiring for almost every single department that we have. So if we go to a community, they may be turning to some criminal activity to support their families. Well, let's get away from that. Let's get you a job with the city of Cleveland. Explain what a pension system is. Get the health insurance. Things of that nature, to where it's not always just criminals being criminals. There's a root cause of why we're there and individuals are doing what they're doing. We find that root cause. And then working together with our partners, because like the doctor was saying, being out in a suburb of a major city, you get the residual criminal element that could cross the borders. Because while we do look at it and we do see the borders, crime doesn't. Crime doesn't care if Cleveland stops at this street and, you know, Shaker Heights starts in the next street. It continues to flow. So the prosecutor of Cuyahoga County, O'Malley, he's developed a crime strategies where regularly we get together with suburb police officers and we look at crime as a whole, where we can have open conversations of, you know, we've had a blue car driving in and out of our city robbing people. Well, you know, we had a blue car also robbing people. And now we can make that connection because, like it was said, usually you have a handful of evildoers creating this very large criminal problem. And once you remove those individuals from that community, you could see through these statistics can show you crime will dramatically start decreasing. And that's when we also come in, and Cleveland's taking a more active role. And before we would do our best to get the bad guy, we would do our best to provide justice, get him locked away in jail. But what about the victim? Well, you know, they're left there to pick up the pieces. And we never, in the past, we didn't do such a great job at assisting with them picking up the pieces. Do they need help with housing? The negative traumatic effect their children incurred by watching this violence. What can we do to help them rebuild? So when these individuals do eventually get out of jail, fingers crossed, they're rehabilitated and they're not evil and doing crime anymore. And they come back in, they're coming into a strong community where they do not accept that behavior, and the community itself starts working together closely with us to fight these crimes.
Here are some of the things, some of the evaluations that I am doing now with community partners and law enforcement agencies. Excuse me. One is in your backyard. I'm just starting up an evaluation with the Shaker Heights Police Department, specifically around their mental health response team, which is sort of like the crisis intervention team. There's a slightly different than Cleveland's crisis intervention team, where they have social workers basically follow up for individuals who are having mental health crisis, as compared to having a police response to mental health response. Because it's not police officers don't necessarily need to respond to some things that are mental health individuals, people who are trained in social work could respond to. And so they got some money from DOJ to provide services for that. Working to evaluate that, and that's in Shaker. And that actually fits within Action 4. If that framework that I talked about, that's an Action 4. I have a new grant with the Cleveland Peacemakers Alliance and the Brenda Glass Multipurpose Trauma Center. And they provide hospital link outreach and recovery services. The Cleveland Peacemakers Alliance is a credible messenger individual grassroots organization that provides services to individuals who go to the hospital, individuals who have been victims of gun violence, and then they get services to the Brenda Glass Multipurpose Trauma Center for housing and other types of services, mental health services. And so they work together to provide services for victims of gun violence. And then I'm working with the Crime Strategies Unit, as the commander mentioned, working to help them with their data. And they're the individuals that are countywide, so they're able to see connections that cross county borders. One thing that a lot of people don't necessarily know is that law enforcement agencies are only allowed really primarily to see data within their borders. But prosecutors' offices in particular are countywide, and so they can connect crimes across the county, whereas law enforcement agencies can usually only see within their agencies. And so the Crime Strategies Unit can connect crimes across the county, and then you have crime analysts to kind of pull together things like gun ballistics and pull together crimes to be able to see those people who are the key drivers of crimes and work to solve those crimes. And you can kind of see how they fit within those actions. So here's our contact information if you want them to follow up with, or you have any further questions. Certainly, I'm fairly easy to find because the university is public, but the police department's information is less public. Universities are always very public. So if you have any further questions or want to find out some more information, here's certainly some our contact information.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your expertise and your information. It's valuable information for us that only read a headline in the newspaper every once in a while and don't have the background information. So I would like to now open it up for questions and answers. And please keep your questions short. Our time is limited. And we already have a hand here. Hold up your hand if you want to ask a question. And Marlene will have the microphone here and speak loudly and clearly into the microphone and keep your questions short. Thank you.
Your focus is local, I know, and my question may involve national aspects. I'm speaking specifically of the NRA, and as well as the gun manufacturers. I'm curious to know, if you know, to what extent do they work together? And secondly, has the influence of the NRA diminished recently? Because, I mean, they're in a lot of legal trouble. I think the last I heard, they're facing bankruptcy, and they have already filed for bankruptcy.
I can say the influence locally, I've been with Cleveland for coming up on 17 years. And never once have I interacted with the NRA as an organization as a whole. As far as filing bankruptcy, I can't speak too much on that. I'm not too familiar. I know a lot of corporations, there's many levels of bankruptcy, and a lot, oftentimes there's other motives behind doing it than going under. So I couldn't really answer that fully, but I know from my personal experience, I've not interacted with them essentially at all.
Yeah, I would say I did hear, I heard probably what you heard about national NRA sort of things, but I would also say that there's an interesting mix of, I was actually just having the conversation with my dad. I'm originally from Texas, about the interesting interplay of like local politics and local as it relates, and state, and then national as it relates to laws and policies and implementation of that. And as a researcher, for example, in ShotSpotter, we have the challenge of trying to, for example, assess ShotSpotter in the context of like local laws. So for example, in Cleveland, it is legal to shoot a weapon. And then state, which is, they recently changed like, carry the permitless carry statewide as in mid 2021. And then you have like federal, so you actually have a very unique combination of laws that affect individuals and I don't even know what Shaker is. So if you can do it in Cleveland, but I don't know what the laws are in Shaker as it relates to being able to discharge a firearm. So you actually are like impacted by a variety of legislation and rules all kind of simultaneously going on. So I would say certainly nationally makes a difference, but locally also very much makes a difference, and at both the local and state level as it relates to gun crimes.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I didn't hear any data on the trends of the ages. I didn't hear any data on trends of the age of the perpetrators. But my question is, what is the police department doing about interacting with the students in the high schools to help them diminish gun violence?
So something that we're doing, and I can speak from personally, myself, we have community engagement officers. They're in the schools every single day. We go to several high schools, one specifically, New Tech West, and we meet with groups of specifically males because they're the main demographic of violent perpetrators. And we have lunch with them. And we sit down and we have open conversations, and we discuss gun violence. We discuss de-escalation techniques. We discuss active listening skills, and we cover a variety of topics to help them get through those years of thinking less emotionally and more forward thinking. If I do this, these 5 things are going to happen. The studies have shown that teenagers think more emotional with common sense, and then as the older you grow, the common sense gets a little bit stronger and that emotion shrinks a little bit. So identifying that to them and helping them understand their methods of thinking and how to just slow that process down and how to take it and get those emotions under control before you result to gun violence, before you result to physical violence. And on the flip side of that, we train our officers to understand that when they arrive at a scene, these young individuals are thinking and acting in a heightened emotional state. So this is how we build a rapport with them to get that emotional state. It's physiologically impossible to sustain that high emotional state for very long. So we have to train our officers, one, don't get sucked into that emotional tornado. Stay outside. This is what you can do. Create distance, create barriers. These are phrases, these are techniques, paraphrasing, minimal encouragers, different active listening skills, so we can bring that emotional response from the teenager down, and then we can communicate on a more rational level. So it's not just helping the teenagers and building that rapport early and often that we're doing, because we go at kindergarten, we're hitting them every single grade. So they know who we are, they know what we do. But also training our officers to understand how to act with someone who's in a heightened emotional state. So we don't overreact and we don't escalate it even further.
That same thing that I provided some of the statistics on from the Cleveland Department of Health on gunshots, on gun violence from 2021 did have a stat on ages. I think I do know the age group. It was the 18 to 24 group was overrepresented by 150%. But the criminologist would tell you that there's a very strong age crime curve by which primarily 17, but it's even moving younger. And certainly in Cleveland, that age is moving younger to where it's really like 15 committing violent crime, serious violent crime, 15 to like, and they usually will age out of that if they don't, if not in prison or dead, sadly, they will age out of that crime curve. So you have this very strong, for males, women don't have the same thing, but for males, there's a age crime curve that they will level off, and people just kind of age out of it as their brains develop and they, settle down and get jobs and, have kids and all that sort of stuff. People's life cycles change. But that means that you have to get them very young, and you have to get them, many of them, services that they need. Many of them have witnessed violence. Many of them are victims themselves from early on, all the things that we know are the risk factors, and being able to get officers trained in the de-escalation, in particular for youth, and getting them trained in like the biology of child's brain. They aren't adults. They don't think like adults. They don't act like adults. It's very important for understanding that. And then, but they are, in Cleveland, I know that they're committing some very serious violent acts at very young ages. And so really trying to get them early and getting help and services very early is the key to that. But having them see officers there is really a core part of that.
I have a question from one of our virtual attendees. Can you see gun violence coming under some semblance of control without some level of gun control legislation?
So I will say that we are seeing gun violence coming under it. As you saw statistically in Cleveland, gun violence is going down. And while there are people who are committing violent acts with firearms, there is also a large population that are responsible gun owners and do not commit gun violence. They own weapons. So to correlate, if you own a gun, you're going to commit these crimes, I don't think is accurate. It's just the proper education, the proper knowledge. Will legislation help? Absolutely. But it's people who are committing crimes with guns aren't really following the laws anyway. So more laws, it'll help, but it's not the end all be all. It takes the community, it takes us working together, helping individuals understand that the gun is not the answer, and providing resources to these individuals so they do not turn towards the gun violence. So it's while it will help, it's a multifaceted approach, and that's one prong of it.
To that end, what are your challenges as far as building relationships with people in the community, as well as sort of seeking out information on where the weapons are coming from? So as you said, a lot of people who are committing these crimes probably aren't obtaining them in a legal way, but the guns. So I'm just interested to see how you sort of balance that.
So some of the challenges we face is just, it's easy for me to sit up here and say, well, nobody likes the police anymore and the media is driving that, but we have to hold some accountability in that. We've done some silly things that make people not trust us. So breaking down those barriers, showing them that we're taking the necessary steps to rebuild that trust in the community, to build a rapport with the community, to put, make deposits in that community bank. So when things happen, we got to make a withdrawal. It's not just earth shattering like it was in May of 2020, when across the nation, there were violent demonstrations against police officers and communities. So building that rapport back up and allowing the community to have a voice in how we solve the problems. Monthly, we hold community meetings, and each community, while we are all Cleveland and Shaker, you could go 4 or 5 blocks in a direction, and it's a completely different community with a different set of societal norms and culture. And what could work in this set of 5 blocks may not work in this set of 5 blocks. So getting out and speaking with the community and allowing you to give us the feedback and how you feel these problems can be solved, and then us working together to solve those issues. And when you have that achieved, people do come to us, and individually, not a lot of people like to speak up in open settings and say, hey, that's the guy with the guns over there. But they do come to us and they do let us know these are the people in our community that you need to focus on. And we're seeing a large success in getting those guns off the street. One of it is through not just traditional face-to-face conversation with the community, but through CJIC, which with ShotSpotter, our officers are showing up. And if there's nobody on scene, fingers crossed, no victims, but there's shell casings there on the ground. Our officers are trained to properly collect these shell casings as evidence. We put them into a national database, and each shell casing essentially has the fingerprint of the gun. Each gun creates certain markings on a shell casing that can be traced back to that specific gun. And in Cleveland, we have a unit ran by Sergeant Bentley, where he takes all these shell casings and he starts mapping them out. And he says, we saw this one gun was used here. We saw this gun was used here. We saw this gun was used here. And we start making the connections like, okay, well, who lives in this area? Who was around that area when this happened? And when we do catch these individuals and we do get our hands on these firearms, we can connect them to a multitude of shootings that we didn't have before. And we start making all of these connections and clearing up these cases and providing justice for that neighborhood.
I think it gets at one of the core aspects of that actions, which is that you have to get the people who are committing the most number of crimes, and violent crimes. They are highly connected to each other and to the neighborhoods, and they are the ones that are the key drivers of crime. And they're also the ones that are passing the weapons around. So you have to be able to connect the weapons to the locations, to the people, to everyone else. And some of the technology is really being able to do that through social network analysis, through forensic analysis and forensic intelligence, like the NIBIN, which is the ability to connect the shell casings together. I've seen the analyses of those things, and you have one weapon that's like connected to like 25, one gun is connected to like 25 different crimes. So you have to, across many different jurisdictions, so you have to have also the ability to like identify and get weapons that shouldn't be in the hands of individuals out of the hands of those individuals. So that is a way to track illegal use of weapons, is being able to connect the weapons across the different crime scenes.
What about the use of automatic weapons? Do you see that a lot in the crimes that you investigate? And wouldn't, we used to have an automatic weapons ban back in the nineties that went, and then the gun violence rate went way down. I think everybody can agree that it would be good to reinstate that, and there is a movement to make that happen. But anyway, so I wanted to know how many of crimes are committed with automatic weapons.
I don't have that statistic in front of me, but not as many as you would think. A lot of it's semi-automatic. But as far as an automatic weapons ban, the problem is, and stop me if I'm wrong, please. Don't let me say that.
Okay, I won't. I promise.
Technology is so great. So we can ban all the automatic weapons we want, but you can go buy a 3D printer and create parts to make semi-automatic weapons automatic, and a couple $100, and then you could mass produce the inserts for the semi-automatics to make them automatic. So while yes, you could ban automatic weapons, technology being what it is now circumvents all of that. And you could make them in your basement.
Mhm. So that one was in the 90s, though. It was in the early 90s, right, that they instituted that weapons ban. It wouldn't look the same today. He's right. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that you give up, but policy is one arm of how you do things. Implementation of the policy is something else. And in ShotSpotter, you can see how fast the weapon, like the gunshots, are coming out. So you can see whether, and it tells them whether it's an automatic or semi-automatic. And
The vast majority. Is
yeah,
semi-automatic.
yeah.
Vast majority.
It's really more often multiple guns than it is. There's multiple guns, multiple shooters at a scene than it is one gun, multiple rounds, right?
Yes.
But because those are much more common, mass shooting is a different thing. Those are, way more deadly, but way more rare, or rarer is rare, than what you would see on a more typical day in Cleveland.
Yes.
Saturday night.
Thank you. Good morning. If I may bring in a global perspective, I recall a gun massacre in Serbia, I think it was, last year. So I just wonder if the panelists or anyone knows what's been the response to that violence. Because it seems like Australia and Canada have been more effective in responding to the gun epidemic. Countries that also have what you would call a gun culture. Thank you.
I think I can maybe speak a little bit to that in terms of just the policy side of things. Yes, I think other countries have certainly responded very differently, but I don't think that the U.S. Well, first of all, none of those have it as in their constitution, and so the U.S. is in a very different place of being able to change how they respond to crimes like that, to these mass shootings. Because we're much, federated because of the state systems, and two, because we have it in the Constitution. So I think, and I just don't think there's an appetite nationally for a response like that. It doesn't mean that you couldn't. I just think that to say that we're like Australia, that we're like New Zealand, that we're like these others, I don't think it's true. I think we could, if there was the ability to, and the type 4, but it would take drastic changes to do that because it's in it's the Second Amendment. So like in the interpretation of people could make decisions about what they want to do for the interpretation of the Second Amendment, right? But like it's still the Second Amendment, it's still in there in the ways that other countries don't have that. I mean, right. So yes. You want to say?
I'm interested in what's driving the gun violence, and I think poverty is probably a key driver, but there's different ways that comes out, especially with the youth. And I'm wondering in Cleveland, what percent do you have a handle on what percent is through the drug culture, like the felony and the illegal aspects of drugs? And are kids being pulled into that? Is there retaliation? Is there competition? Is it related to drugs? And I'm not sure because I have that kind of thought in my head, but I don't really know if Cleveland, that's the primary driver there. That's pushing that.
So yes and no. Back before technology, cell phones, apps, things of that nature, there was a lot of gun violence, and this is my territory. I'm standing out in this. I'm physically out here selling these drugs, and there were more conflicts, more violence with guns. So is there still guns related to drugs? 1000%. They go hand in hand. And yes, but we're seeing more, it's still gun violence. Gun violence is going down, but not related to drugs as much, just because that territorial feuding, it's still there, but I would say not as strong as you would think.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's differentiation. There's the interpersonal violence type of crimes. And so, especially because I'm a gender-based scholar, so there's also, there's crimes, interpersonal violent crimes, which I think are, sort of separate component of that. And then there are sort of like, not directly related, I would say not directly related to like gun or like drug beefs,
Yeah,
but like reputational or retaliatory, or like really, fighting between families or neighborhood, right? Like where they're retaliating, like they're teenagers, they're doing, back and forth types of crimes, but it's not because like you stole my drugs or you're on my corner necessarily. Is that the way you would describe it?
So if I insult you, you, and maybe 30 people in this room has heard it. But now with the youth today, I insult you on social media and 15,000 people see it repeatedly. And so there's more of that personal, I have to defend my honor, and this is the way I defend my honor. So that's where you see more of the gun violence than it was the drugs fighting for territory.
Yeah, I've seen some in the prosecutor's office where they've prosecuted some in the crime strategies unit. And yeah, all the beefs are all on Instagram. And you're like, well, that doesn't seem very smart. Where it's like, I'm going to go shoot you. And then the prosecutor plays the clip and it's like, you did. And then it was like, and then he went and shot him. And then the other one's like, well, then I'm going to shoot you back. And then he does. And then, like they've documented and admitted to, like this sort of like back and forth, right? Like all on the Instagram.
You would be surprised how many crimes were solved on Instagram.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of the shocking nature of like, wait, well, you say you're going to do it, and then you go with the gun, right? And then you show the gun, and then you do it, and then you're like, sir, here's the gun you said you're going to do it with.
And we'd have crimes where they've live streamed them on social media committing the crimes. So it's just drugs, it's still there. The guns and drugs will always be there. They go hand in hand, but it's not as prevalent driving force of the gun violence as it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I was wondering, you've mentioned a lot of good things, good programs you're doing, to help
And I think, you would probably agree that all those programs are not perfect, but they help in small ways and in other ways, the program. But then I noticed when legislation came up, you said, well, legislation isn't perfect. And I think that's correct. Legislation, like all the other things you're doing, isn't perfect, but can be good.
Yes.
It can help. And I was wondering if you agree with that, or if you put those in two different categories.
So if I came across saying legislation would not help, I apologize. What I'm saying is legislation won't help in and of itself. It's a multifaceted, multi-pronged approach to reducing violent crimes, unless legislation is a huge part. Because we can go out and we can do all of these things, but if legislation doesn't say it's illegal, we can't do anything. So legislation is an extremely critical part of it, yes. But it's just one section of multiple steps we need to take.
Evaluators, researchers say policy and legislation is a very blunt object, like a blunt tool. And it's a very useful tool, but it's a blunt tool. So then you need other types of things to come back in to not be nearly as blunt. So because you can't, the blunt object of being able to fix a problem, that's the first policy and legislation is the first one. And then you need all the other types of programs to kind of go in and not be nearly as blunt and help fix the problem in other sorts of ways. So you need both to be able to do it. You can't just solve things from policy, and you can't just solve things through social service programs or other types of programs. You need both. But a lot of people just look to legislation. And again, it's usually just the first step, a very, sort of hard, blunt, like I have a program, or I have an evaluation about collecting DNA with the prosecutor's office. And Ohio had legislation about collecting DNA from individuals who have been arrested for a felony. And then once we started the program, we found out that on average, about 1 in every 2 to 1 in every 5 individuals had not been swabbed and put into the DNA database. So they had a policy. The state said that you were supposed to be doing it, but people weren't doing it. So like you can have a policy, that doesn't mean that people are following the policy, right? So there's a blunt, and then there's like making sure the policy is being done as it's supposed to be doing it, and training people to do it, and so forth.
What is the situation in Cleveland regarding gangs? Do we have strong gang groups in Cleveland as we do in some other cities?
So as far as the gang groups go, yes, there are gangs. You're seeing strong gangs being formed in prison, that are, then when they get out, they bring them to the streets. But it's more, the gangs have gotten smaller to where they're more just, I would call them crews, like a block of individuals as opposed to whole neighborhoods. It's shrinking and growing, but there still are gangs, larger gangs, and there's still smaller gangs in Cleveland. There is, people will always find like-minded individuals and form groups. So some are criminals, some are not. This young lady right here has been trying to.
Hi. You showed a slide in your presentation where it said, I think homicides have gone down 64%, compared to last year at this time in the year.
Yes.
That's a really precipitous drop. Is that just because we're towards the beginning of the year and there isn't a lot of data? Or is there some particular reason why it's gone down so remarkably?
It's year to date. So this time last year, it's down 63%. And a lot of it is through, we're seeing the fruits of the labor of the strategies, working with Cleveland State on the data analysis. We are very, very, very data driven now, and looking at the numbers and having the scholars say, these are strategies, look at this, focus stuff here, and actually building relationships with the communities more. This is what you see. This is what you see. And it's an effort through the universities and the scholars working closely with us. It's an effort through legislations passed to assist with DNA collections to identify criminals, through grants, through local and federal, working together to have a task force targeting violent crime. And the mayor Bibb saying we're standing up against violence, and these are the programs I'm putting in to where he's giving back not just to the police but to the communities to enrich the neighborhoods and have different after school programs. The decrease is the fruits of the labor that everything's going forward and everything's looking like it's trending in the right directions.
It's really remarkable.
It is.
I would also say there was also like COVID produced a disruption that that criminologists had not seen since 1960s of this nationwide of disruption in crime. And so there was a really big spike, especially in cities like Cleveland, and of the after effects of COVID, and that needed this very strong when you turn a boat around, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, right. I don't ride boats, right? But I don't drive boats. But you need to turn the ship around there, and we're definitely seeing some changes there.
How does that compare to, say, pre-COVID, like 2018?
So nationally, you're starting to see the trends. Actually, nationally, victimization rates are about what they were at around 2018. I don't know what Cleveland's are.
I don't have
I
it.
don't know, but nationally, that's what the victimization rates are. They're like they were pre-COVID.
Then with the data-driven approach to policing, do you predict that the crime will continue going down, hopefully?
Yeah, in Cleveland.
Yeah,
Mhm.
we had a discussion, and it's something where you're constantly changing, because we'll do things, and just as police officers and the scholars adjust our strategies, criminals adjust their strategies. So you'll see it decrease, you'll see it plateau, maybe spike up a little bit, but then we adjust our strategies, you see it go back down. So it's gonna ebb and flow a little bit. Right now, we're doing great. We're right in that ship, and
Right there, yeah, right in the ship.
fingers crossed, it will continue to trend down. And I don't see it.
That do with the data, because that's very exciting.
A lot of, there's several meetings, the major city chiefs organization, stuff like that, where it's chiefs from all these major cities throughout the nation get together regularly and communicate regularly about the trends they're seeing in their communities and the strategies they use. And you see it nationally. Sometimes it's different depending on the region, but all these strategies, the major city chiefs always communicate with each other to bounce ideas off of and different trends and ideas.
I'm gonna have to interrupt here. We're running out of time. We have time for one more question.
In the Cleveland area, there are department stores which sell the guns. And I have gone to few and said, I don't buy anymore. Now when I go on to buy a gun, do they check my background or just sell the product?
No, they should. Anytime you purchase a firearm, they do a background check on you.
Are you sure?
They going back to the policy and the law says you need to do it. If they don't do it and we find out about it, they are held accountable.
The state says the state says now that you don't need a permit
To
to carry it, but they should be doing a background check for you to buy it legally.
Yes.
Right.
Oh. Okay, well, thank you so very much. I really appreciate it, and everyone here does. Our next forum will be on February 18th And the title is Monopolies. Google, Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft. Small countries, small companies for sure. These companies are the four most valuable companies in the United States and four of the top 5 most valuable companies in the world. Speakers include Jenny Hawkins, Associate Economics Professor at Case Weatherhead School of Management, and Annette Allenbeck, Associate Law Professor at Case Western. So we have another boring topic, right?
Yeah.
A couple weeks. You are welcome to attend our 10:15 service upstairs in the sanctuary, virtually on our YouTube or in person. The YouTube address is uucleveland.org. Learn more about our Unitarian pluralistic theology and how we can answer the question, how do I want to live? Join both speakers, Reverend Rena Scher and Reverend Christy Stewart, 2 affiliated Unitarian Universalist community ministers. I have one more suggestion. If you'd like to receive reminders of the forums we have every other week, please sign the clipboard on the circular table in the back of the room with your contact information, and we will be in touch with you. This forum has been recorded, and it will be available in a few days at uucleveland.org. Thank you again for joining us, both our speakers and our audience. Thank you.